All right, so we're gonna finish our life insurance conversation here, and we're going to um, get into VUL, which is really the last. Here we go. Really, the last frontier we haven't gotten into. So we've kind of built this case here from term insurance to then IUL. We talked about permanent insurance and how the indexed options work, how the accumulation works. We talked about illustrating an income stream and how Nationwide builds their product specifically. And so this last pivot to VUL is really a pretty natural transition because all we're really doing is changing the engine in the car. You know, if the car is permanent life insurance, we're just swapping out a different engine that's going to drive the rate of return that we earn inside the policy. And so what I have pulled up here is this sample universe or index UL policy that we've been working on. So if I click this blue change button, I can pivot right over to, we're going to make this now a VUL, which is kind of a cool thing on their software. And it should bring forward all of our inputs from our prior case. And so here we are. So it's the same setup, right? Same $250,000 death benefit, same increasing death benefit option. We've got $400 a month going in. One of the differences you're now going to see, though, is if we go to interest rate and income, you're going to see a lot more options pop up here. So fundamentally, what is a VUL versus an IUL? It's simply variable on the investment rate of return. So now we're going to have a substantial list of different mutual funds that we can allocate to that I'll show you on a separate screen here in a moment when we illustrate this. But now we have a lot more upside potential in the market, but we also have more downside risk. And so, you know, as we go, we're going to talk about this, but there's a few things I really like about Nationwide. Number one, we can blend in variable sub accounts. We can also blend in indexed options. So if you look down here, they still have a few of their core indexed options, the uncapped S&P 500, the annual point-to-point crediting rate, and then the multi-index monthly average. So that's the one I tend to focus on. And so what's really incredible about this product is I can have a blend product between some VUL, some IUL. But the way I position this to a lot of clients is, hey, we can start VUL as we're accumulating money. You know, negative years in the market don't really hurt you too much when you're adding premium every month and you don't have a ton of cash value in there to lose. But if we can pick up a higher tailwind and get more rate of return, that's going to improve the policy and accumulation. But when you get later in life, you know, we have the ability to pivot to some or potentially even all of this cash value into the indexed option. And now all of a sudden we have the ability to take your accumulated cash value and put it into a place where it's guaranteed not to lose money. And if we're guaranteed not to lose money, we can take a very predictable income stream out because we don't have to account for market losses. And we don't have to change to a policy. We don't have to do a 1035 exchange. We don't have to requalify for new underwriting. We don't have to start a new 10 or 15 year high expense period because we've already paid all those initial fees. And so, I mean, it's a really easy sell when you can demonstrate the flexibility and versatility of this product. And so almost without exception, because I'm fully licensed, I'm going to do a VUL before I do an IUL because I can essentially make it an IUL. And I don't want to get into the weeds today on this. It's not super relevant. It's one of those things you just have to take my word for it. But I'm a really technical guy. It's been a couple of years since I've done this, but I spent an afternoon once running a few different scenarios. And I basically, what I wanted to know was if I take Nationwide's VUL and I turn it into an IUL from the beginning, how does it compare with their IUL? And what I discovered was, and so what I did is the same premium, same client, same age, same everything. And then I went in there and I basically just illustrated at the same index crediting rate, but the VUL is slightly different in how it's priced. The fees are actually a hair lower in the VUL than they are in the IUL in terms of some administrative fees and all that. But the conditional endorsement credit is also a little bit lower in the VUL. And so, you know, I just wanted to kind of net all of that out. And what I discovered is the VUL, apples to apples, is a hair more efficient. if you turn it into an IUL, then their IUL is, which is kind of a cool thing. And so that's what I wanted to, and even frankly, if it was close, the versatility would have been worth it to me. But then on top of that, if I can illustrate something, because if we look at these crediting rates, your average crediting rate is 5.87, although it says here 6.42. That seems odd to me, but either way, we can illustrate the VUL, and I think they let you go up to 10%, but I always illustrate at 8. Because I always want to look to a client and say, hey, I'm being really conservative here. We're being really conservative on rate of return assumptions, and underwriting class that we're choosing on an illustration and all that. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going to illustrate this at 8%. I'm going to leave everything else the same. I'm not going to do any riders. I'm going to click output design to make sure I've got my annual cost summary selected, which I do. And if I hit calculate, now I don't have that IUL pulled up handy, but what you'd see here, if I go down here to current charges, you'll see that the cash value accumulation is going to be significantly greater at 8% than at 6.42 or whatever the IUL illustrates at. That extra 1.5% is a huge number of just pure compounded growth. And so we've already covered a lot of this in terms of how this works and how it illustrates. If I go down to the annual cost summary, same thing, I have that conditional credit endorsement. It is a little bit less. I think this is a 20 basis point credit endorsement where the IUL is 40 basis point. But the offset there is the internal fees on the VUL, administrative fees up here, is a little bit less than that is on the IUL. And so if you fund it properly, it's probably a wash or even more advantageous for the VUL. But these internal costs are just incredibly cheap. I have just to give you a fun story on the VUL. I've got a VUL. It's got a bunch of cash value in it. And I was just looking at I've owned it for 21 years. And my monthly cost of insurance, if I take that as a percentage basis of my cash value. In other words, if I say, okay, what is the expense ratio of my cost of insurance? It's like 48 basis points. Well, so let's call it 1/2 of 1%. And then I've got some really low cost index funds in there. So basically for the cost of a average mutual fund portfolio, I have $1.5 million of permanent life insurance. I have a huge amount of cash value growing completely tax-free and tons of versatility. I mean, it's an incredible product. But I'll tell you an even better story. We were in Santa Fe last week, as I mentioned, and at dinner one night, a group of 6 or 7 of us were all talking shop, and all of us have done well. We've all made big money, saved big money. And this guy, you guys wouldn't know the name. I barely knew him. I've just seen his name around forever. Doesn't have a huge business, but just been with us literally since, I think he said he started in 1994. So he predates me quite a bit. And he has 3 VULs, but his oldest VUL goes back to 1994. And he maxed it out. And I think it was like $1 million face or something. But his total cost basis, total premiums paid, which he hasn't paid premiums on this thing in years, was like $700 and some thousand. And he pulled it up on his phone. He's got $3 million of surrender value in his policy with Transamerica. It was an old WRL product. It's the same one I own. And they had it's called the FEB2. They ran that for years and years. And I mean, what an incredible story of utilizing these products. And so he's got another one with like 600,000 of cash value, and then he's got one he just started a couple of years ago. But you guys, I mean, that's the power of our business, right? These products can be life-changing vehicles when properly structured, properly funded, and given the factor of time, right? We're so hyper focused on where are we at right now? How many of us have clients that are 2, 3, 4 years into something and like, okay, where are we at? How well is this performing? But are we on the track that's going to take us to, you look at some of those illustrations and they look like that. How many of you have seen illustrations that show $1, $2, $3, $4 million of cash value way down the road in a policy? Well, yeah, these things absolutely exist out there, and I didn't need that confidence because I already believed that would be true, but it was absolutely reassuring and absolutely cool to look on his own phone, his own policy, and just see 3 million of cash value. And so, anyways, I think it's really incredible. I mean, that's far superior than what an IUL would have performed. You know, you're not going to quadruple your cost basis in an IUL in 30 years. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so if we go down here, you know, these costs are incredibly low. And so if you're properly funding this, plus you have the benefit of the permanent life insurance, plus you have the tax-free accumulation, you know, there's a case to be made for a lot of people owning a product like this because it just addresses a lot of needs that people have. And, you know, one of my go-to statements that's a core belief is most people need a lot of life insurance when they're in their, let's call it their family raising years. In fact, you don't have to convince most people of that. Sometimes what they consider to be a lot is not even what they need. A little bit of education that we do there. But then they go to a certain point in life where they don't need nearly as much of life insurance, but they probably don't need zero. You know, just about everybody wants to have something in place as a benefit to their spouse or kids if they pass away. They want to make sure burial expenses and all that are covered. A lot of people want to have something to show for the years and years of life insurance premiums they paid. You know, the hardcore Ramseyites will tell you, I'll pay my 30-year term and just accumulate a bunch of money. And then if the life insurance disappears, so be it. But life doesn't always work out that way. So to have a self-completing plan with a death benefit that's always going to be there is incredibly valuable. And so really everything that we've covered up until this point is going to be virtually the same, just a little bit more versatile, a little bit more efficient on this VUL. And so if I was showing this to a client, I might look at this and say, okay, let's pretend you're 70 years old and you've got $600,000 of cash value in here. You know, let me tell you what most of my clients in their 60s and early 70s tell me. They were really high growth, comfortable with volatility in the market in their 30s, 40s, and 50s because they wanted to accumulate a lot of money, but their risk tolerance changes dramatically when they're not earning money anymore and they're not saving money anymore, and they just have this lump sum hanging out there in different accounts, and they're starting to look at that as, hey, this is our source of income for the rest of our lives. This is our legacy to our kids. Your risk tolerance will change dramatically. And, you know, going through a 10% market correction is like something I barely pay attention to in my life today, but it can be a traumatic event when you're 64 years old. And so would it be important to you, Mr. Klein, to be able to have this 600,000 and we flip a switch and we could slide that into a fund where you're guaranteed not to lose a penny and you can still earn up to 9 or 10% interest in an up market? And I mean, I've yet to have a client that was like, well, that would be incredible. Yeah, I would definitely want something like that. We don't have to transfer funds. We don't have to start a new policy. It doesn't cost you a penny. We can do as little or as much of your cash value into that. We can pull it back and go back into funds where it's not a one-time move. We just have ultimate versatility. I would tell you guys, this is, to my awareness, the most versatile permanent life insurance product that exists in the industry. Because if you think about it, one thing we said about Nationwide last week is, you know, Nationwide's IUL, where it's competitive is it's competitive on low cost. So if we were to do a training sometime on comparing 3 or 4 different IULs, which I don't know is relevant, but if we did, you would see that Nationwide's crediting rates are probably a hair lower than maybe some competitors out there. Transamerica would be an easy one to point to. Transamerica's cap rates are higher than Nationwide's, no doubt, but so are their fees. And so, you know, it's basically an illustration dependent, you know, by illustration, you know, contest to see which is better for each individual client. But that's Nationwide's competitive advantage. But if you think about it on the VUL, they have the same low fees, but we're no longer hamstrung by lower caps. You can have the same low fees, but an S&P 500 index fund in a Nationwide VUL is going to earn exactly the same amount of money as an S&P 500 index fund in XYZ carrier that might have higher internal fees. And so you have an incredibly efficient design. And because Nationwide's a mutual company, You know, if you log into Nationwide today, they have a big red banner right on their login that says something like it addresses the Hurricane Helene disaster, and it says if you're one of our members that is affected, you know, please click here or something to that effect. And I just think that's such a profound statement, because when you're a policyholder with Nationwide, you are a member. You are quite literally a part owner of the company. You know, if I buy a share of stock in Coca-Cola, I don't own Coke stock, but I own Apple stock, for instance. I'm literally a part owner in Apple. No, I'm an infinitesimally small owner of Apple, but you guys get the drift, right? I'm going to participate in the growth of Apple, and you know, personally, I mean, I don't know, I probably own 50,000 of Apple stock, and so I'm going to buy a couple iPhones here later today or tomorrow. And, you know, I know they're gouging me at like a 35% profit margin and all that. But guess what? I'm an owner, right? I'm doing all right on the back end because my Apple stock's up like 50% in the last 7 months. So you guys, what we got to think about here is when you're a member of Nationwide, you're participating in the expense management, the profitable growth, the stability of the company. And that's reflected over here in this conditional credit endorsement. And so, guys, one of the real skills in this business, and one of the big separators in being able to really get business done, is you got to be able to make some things like this jump off the page. Because life insurance is drudgery, it's boring, it's a hassle, it's something nobody wants to talk about or think about. It's on the bottom of everybody's to-do list that never gets done, right? You know, you go into life insurance licensing training, whether you're doing it virtually or in person, and it's boring, it's dry, it's dated, yet it's such a needed product. It's in a world where our whole world is innovated, and you know, the world looks different, functions different, operates different than it ever has before, with technology impacting everything. The basic need of creating an immediate estate and a benefit for your family goes back thousands of years. And so here we are, right? And so to be able to make this stuff jump off the page and really, I hate to use the word sell it, but if you can really promote the value that somebody's getting with a properly designed product, and here's why I love Nationwide compared to all the other carriers I work with, that gets business done. People buy into that confidence and like, hey, I'm never going to understand the way you understand this. I mean, one of the things my clients have told me for years is some version of, hey, I don't fully understand this, but I trust you. I know you've got my best interest. And so if you say this is the right thing to do, then let's do it. That's the business we're in, right? And how you build that trust is consistency and service and personality and all those things, but it's also in competence. It's also in being able to really clearly explain this and not get lost in an illustration, or not gloss over something and be like, oh, it's great, just trust me, just sign here. But take the time. And that's why for years and years, because when I first got started in the business, and I'll leave names away, but I was trained to not show the cost and values ledger. I was trained to do that. And I did that for a couple of times, and it just felt sleazy to me. I felt like I'm trying to like not talk about this thing over here, and hey, forget over there, let's focus over here. And you know, I'm just more technical in nature, and I started looking at that cost of values ledger. I'm like, wait a minute, like this isn't so scary. In fact, if I build a policy properly, I actually think this accentuates the value of this policy, especially when I compare the cost of the life insurance to taxes you would otherwise pay if we did this in a non-qualified account, or to the rising cost of term life insurance if we had to keep renewing that, whatever that was relevant to that case. And so I just started doing that on my own, and I think it's worked out all right for me. But I think that's where trust and credibility comes from, is it comes from just radical transparency. Hey, let's shine a bright light on the trickiest part of this policy, because nobody in the history of the world has ever rejected the idea of permanent life insurance on merit. Nobody, not even Dave Ramsey. What everybody rejects is the idea, okay, well, that's a great feature, but at what cost? And then you go down this road of, okay, could we accomplish a similar goal at a lesser cost? And that's where the conversation gets to. But nobody's ever said, hey, if you tell me that, I'm going to have a paid up asset no matter when I die, that's going to go into my family. Nobody's ever said that's a bad idea. And by the way, we do the same thing in real estate, but we have a different conversation. Because if the conversation, I will say, in recent years, in this housing crisis we're in and rising interest rates, you're starting to more and more actually see public commentators and finance experts and all that mainstream literature, not completely scoff at the idea of renting, in a more transient economy where people are moving more and maybe not necessarily tied to living in the same city as their job. Our world is changing before our very eyes. But for most of my career, renting was akin to throwing your money away, and that was the conventional wisdom. And owning was a better financial decision. And I think people more and more are starting to question that and say, well, maybe not in all cases. But for most of my career and for the decades before, home ownership was just unequivocal, like superior choice. Well, that's what permanent life insurance is. Home ownership comes with a lot of additional costs. I'll show you my annual expense report to validate that, especially at a home like I live in, right? But of course, my home appreciates in value and all those things. So you guys get back to this idea of being transparent and understanding the product. And so my challenge to you guys as we wrap up is, I don't think you're going to have the ability to run a VUL illustration if you're not securities licensed. So I can't tell you how important I consider it to be registered with TFA and get your securities license. It's an additional cost. It's an additional couple of licenses to study for, but that's what makes you a full scale advisor. That's where our company's going. Our company TFA, I can tell you this from Santa Fe, and I can tell you this from lots of other conversations. We are super committed to building, a fully licensed field force and helping people scale businesses that are fully licensed. I had a one-on-one breakfast with Mike Brodeur out there, and he's that chief operating officer that's Todd Buchanan's right-hand man I told you about. And he and I have been working on some stuff behind the scenes this past year and build a pretty cool relationship. And he's got his hands. I mean, that guy works like 90 hours a week. I mean, he's everywhere. He's just completely spread too thin. And so getting an hour of his time is very valuable. And so he's over WFG and TFA, and he's doing a bunch of operational stuff, all this budget stuff I mentioned for big, both, but he comes from a broker dealer background. So when he and I talk, I mean, he'll privately tell me things like, he's like, TFA is where it's at, right? Like, we're going to support WFG, and it's a huge engine and, a life only business, but he knows we're different. And his heart and his intellect and his biggest desires are to really massively grow TFA. And there's a lot that goes into that from a corporate standpoint. But it's a huge asset for our company. And so make it a huge asset for you guys. I can't recommend it. I do believe this, that if you go and get your securities licenses, I think you're going to find more business to do. I think you're gonna have more confidence. I think you're gonna feel differently about what you are and your level of commitment to our business. And I think that comes across in attracting more people, communicating with more people. And on the heels of this and coming into next week, I already have an idea for next week, but we're gonna kind of shift more into a campaign of activity heading into this fall. And I want to really ramp up activity heading into, you guys. We got 3 big things coming up. We got the Cincinnati event, we've got the grand opening of our office here in Toledo, and we've got WealthWave in Dallas. So in the next 4 months, we've got 3 massive events and I think our grand opening potentially will be more than just one night or one event, and we'll start talking about that as we get closer. But I want a campaign of activity, October, November, December, of contacting more people, building massive momentum, getting cash flows up, getting more teammates added. And I want to spend some time there the next few weeks, and then we'll circle back on some product stuff. But hopefully we've added some value here for you guys on VUL training. We're right at our time limit here. Is there any last minute questions on what we've covered here today?
Yeah, I know it's more elaborate than what you could probably do right now at the end, but the loan provision I thought was, the big differentiator of why Nationwide is so competitive in this space. So I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that real quick.
I mean, you can.
So basically after 10 years is when you get a wash loan to
Yep.
borrow your money, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's probably a big longer of a conversation we can have, but there's this idea of fixed loans and index loans and variable loans and you know, I've always done fixed loans, and so it's kind of a core belief of mine. But yeah, the biggest point to make right now is it's a wash loan. So there's no real true cost to that loan over time, and that's really important when you get to down the road stuff. And so, anyways, we could touch on that next week for sure. But I want to focus really a lot on activity and try to ramp some things up, contacting, start using our wealth wave tools a little bit more, and kind of have that moving before we go into Cincinnati. And I think it's going to make Cincinnati a lot more relevant for everybody. So appreciate you guys. Let's keep up the great energy, and we'll talk to y'all soon.